We are back here. John Nichols from the Nation magazine, L. Joy Williams, also here. Kevin Williamson from the National Review, and Anna Marie Cox from The Guardian. Great to have you all here. We are talking about the state of the down ballot races. And Anna Marie, you said you had a theory about why. No, because we've seen this break that has happened, I think, in the last month that's really clear, decidedly in Democrats' direction. It's been across the country. So when you're thinking about theorizing what's going on, right? It can't be candidate equality because it's happening both in Connecticut and Virginia and Massachusetts and Nevada and in House races. And we're going to talk to someone who's running against Representative Steve King in Iowa in just a bit. What is your theory on this?
Well, if you look at the swing states, if you look at Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Virginia, where the places that, obviously where swing states where Romney has the biggest gender gap, actually, are those three swing states. I think in Virginia, actually, something like 20 points, or it was at some point. What those three states have in common is some of the most restrictive approaches to choice that have been put up in any states, have been put up in those state legislatures. And I just have this instinct or theory that perhaps women in those states look at what's happening at their state and these awful things that are being said and being proposed, the transvaginal ultrasound in Virginia, and also I believe in Pennsylvania is where that was as well. I think that taints the Republican ticket.
Up the ticket.
Up the ticket.
So the extremism of the state party.
It makes Republicans look like they're anti-women. Now, I don't know if I don't want to say Republicans are anti-women, but I think women look at that.
I agree, but then here's the question is, why in the last month, right? So the question is, like, that's been the case. They've been passing that. Something's happened in the last month. Now, there's one argument you can make, which is the Todd Akin flap had a real branding effect and reminded people of the stuff that had been going on.
A couple of things about that. One, I think it's a myth that Pennsylvania is a swing state. I mean, if you go back and look at the way it's gone in the last
it's going to go for the
elections. I mean, it's just not a swing state. It hasn't been for a while. Secondly, I think you're absolutely right about Akin just sort of poisoning the whole Republican brand. He is a good reminder of what a lot of people don't like about the Republican Party. But also, I think it's really important to keep this in mind. You're talking about nationalizing the race. I mean, I've been covering Elizabeth Warren for a while. I've been following that race fairly closely. I don't think she has any choice but to nationalize the race. Because if you've ever seen her speak, she knows not the first thing about Massachusetts. Her world pretty much ends at Cambridge. And
we're going to get Charlie Pierce.
I've never heard her say one word about a state-level specific Massachusetts issue.
Well, but here's
in anything but the most perfunctory fashion.
We're going to bring in Charlie Pierce in a second, but I want to give my observations from Nevada, where I was this weekend. And I should say, I was there visiting my brother, who, for purposes of full disclosure, is the state director for Obama for America in Nevada. So
I'm shocked.
That's out there. Yeah, exactly.
Runs in the family.
But it was really, here's what was so fascinating to me. Shelley Berkley is a congresswoman there, and she's running against Dean Heller, who was a congressman, who then got appointed to fill John Ensign's seat after he had to resign in disgrace. And you go out to Las Vegas and you think, well, God, Las Vegas is one of the most, 3-4 most distinct places in America. Right? New Orleans, New York City, Las Vegas, they're up there of what's the median America look like? Las Vegas is quite different, right? It's a place with tons of local issues. There's, of course, Yucca Mountain, which is, the nuclear waste facility, which is always in every Nevada debate, like the first question. But there's also a massive foreclosure rate, the worst in the country, highest unemployment in the country. Clark County, which is where about 80% of the votes are, 80% of the homeowners in Clark County are underwater on their mortgages. I think it's as high as that. So you go in thinking, I'm going to see a race, and this is a really interesting race, hotly contested, right, basically a neck-and-neck race between Shelley Berkley and Dean Heller. I'm going to see a race that is about all the distinctness of this place that is experiencing special problems. And that is not at all the case. It is a totally nationalized election. I get in, I turn on the TV in the hotel, and it's ads from Crossroads GPS accusing Shelley Berkley of cutting Medicare because she voted for Obamacare. It's ads from Shelley Berkley attacking Dean Heller, who voted twice for the Ryan budget, once in the House and once in the Senate. The first Ryan budget that would voucherize Medicare without a choice, right? Not the second one. And so what you have there, and I thought this to me made me think this is what's happening, right? This is a very nationalized race, and I think Paul Ryan's place on the ticket was part of that nationalization. Because if you're looking what happened a month ago, here's Shelley Berkley. We sat down for an interview, and I asked her about this Medicare question.
Let's not make any mistake here. There's only one candidate in this race, my opponent, who has voted to kill Medicare by turning it over to private insurance companies and guaranteed benefits. I don't think anybody in the state of Nevada or the United States wants to continue overpayments to insurance companies, but by restricting and ending those overpayments, we extended the life of Medicare by 9 years.
The interesting thing about your opponent, Dean Heller, is that he voted for the early version of the Ryan plan, which was actually the more aggressive, which would have turned all of Medicare under 55 into the voucher program. He then voted against the second version, which was actually the more moderate version, right? So he's got a sort of a strange record on this.
Look, there's a lot to do with political expediency right now. The fact is that my opponent voted not once, but twice to end Medicare by turning it over to private insurance companies, and that's not going to work in this state.
So here, the reason we play that clip is because Dean Heller realized the second time he had to pass the Ryan budget, he realized he's got to run for re-election statewide, right? And he votes against the Ryan budget, even though the Ryan budget has moved to the left from the first version of the Ryan budget, right? Because it offers seniors a choice whether you want to enter this voucher program or stay with traditional Medicare. And to me, if you're going to say what happened a month ago that switched things, I think it's Ryan. I think Ryan on the ticket has made this, and for some reason, strategically, Republicans have decided they want to have a debate about Medicare, about who's cutting Medicare more, and that they're the party that is the defenders of Medicare, and I just think that is strategically ridiculous.
You're so right. And when people bring...
Thank you, John. Finally somebody said it on my TV show.
And it's not because we
can't get any
are
credit.
Associated. No, this is... When people bring up Aiken, I was thinking, wow, that's lovely, that's nice, that's fine. No, come on, it's Paul Ryan. And here's the bottom line on this. Before Paul Ryan was selected for the ticket, you had Republican Senate candidates airing ads saying, I'm not with Paul Ryan. Don't look at me as a Paul Ryan guy. That's not me. And now suddenly you put him on the ticket and you make every Republican House and Senate candidate have to answer questions about Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. And this week, Nancy Pelosi, the daughter of a very effective ward politician in Baltimore who knows how to jump on things, started airing ads with pictures of Paul Ryan and Republican House candidates. Why? Because this is a nationalized race, and in fact, it's totally legitimate.
In addition to, and I think I agree with you that adding Ryan to the ticket definitely adds to that. I think we also can't not forget timing, right? That the American electorate is also tuned more in now. Right. And so it's something we were saying earlier that in the polls that were months ago, you couldn't really pay, they weren't real reflective of what people thought because people weren't that tuned in. And so now people are tuned in. It's less than 40 days, to Election Day. And so people more and more have a view on sort of who they going to vote for, who represents.
And having been at the convention and listened to these, wall-to-wall pans to Medicare,
it must drive you crazy.
Just made me miss the Republican Party that wants to abolish the damn thing. It's a stupid program. It's going away anyway. It's totally financially unsustainable. Anyone who can do math can tell you that. It's a question of whether it goes away in 10 years or 15 years or 22 years. I mean, there are lots of different ways to let Medicare fail, but it's going to fail.
No, it's not.
Can we just say
Medicare's unfunded liabilities are more than the GDP of the planet.
Yeah. No. But rather than worry about that,
if you extend out 100 years,
rather than worry about
that's net present value.
Rather than worry about that talking point, let us
it's
worry
not a talking point for God's sake.
Let us worry about some reality here. Can we just say that Mr. Simpson and Mr. Bowles, when they watched those conventions, must have felt, wow, here's the love we were missing.
Yeah, exactly.
The fact of the matter is that we do have serious conversations to have about these issues. Neither the Republican Party or the Democratic Party is in the midst of a serious conversation about these issues at this point. What we have done by the selection of Paul Ryan, one of the most inept selections of a vice presidential candidate in the history of the Republic, by the selection of Paul Ryan, Mitt Romney has said we do not want to have a discussion about these issues. We are going to have a discussion specifically about Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and we Republicans are going to run on the theory that we're fans of it by nominating for the vice presidency a guy who wants to rip it apart.
For the record, I think Aaron Burr was an incredibly dumb choice.
So you're saying Romney nominated Ryan because he didn't want to talk about entitlement reform?
No,
but
here's the weird thing.
And that's not a serious issue?
No,
I mean, it's the issue.
They are running, though, but they are running on saying Barack Obama wants to cut Medicare.
Right, which is what they ran on in 2010.
Convoluted.
I want to bring in Charlie Pierce. I want to
cut it for what?
I want to bring in Charlie Pierce, who was at the debate this week between Elizabeth Warren and Scott Brown, the first of four, right after we take a break. All right. I would say the marquee Senate race in the country, one, Kevin, that you've written about, is the Massachusetts Senate race. And I think that's because, obviously, Scott Brown, who won in a special election to take Ted Kennedy's seat and almost single-handedly dispatch the Affordable Care Act, although it did end up getting passed and signed. That was the real moment in which the Tea Party announced itself in American politics as a genuine electoral force. Took a lot of people by surprise. So Scott Brown is a kind of iconic figure on the right for that reason. Elizabeth Warren, his opponent, who was the brainchild behind the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau that was included in the Dodd-Frank legislation. She was on the congressional oversight panel that oversight TARP. She wrote an amazing book called The Two-Income Trap about sort of stagnated middle American wages. She was a bankruptcy professor at Harvard Law. She's an iconic figure on the left. And so this is a big race. There's a lot of money in it, a lot of national attention. Elizabeth Warren had been polling down basically the whole race so far. Scott Brown is a very good politician, very able, incredibly relatable, has an genuinely amazing personal story. In fact, his memoir is really incredible. I would recommend it to anyone. I mean, the guy really has an incredible personal story. Very effective politician. And even though Barack Obama was up 22 points in Massachusetts, was managing to win, that has really, it seems, shifted in the last week or so, 2 weeks. We've seen poll after poll after poll with Elizabeth Warren up. There's one poll showing Scott Brown up, but there's been a definite shift in the race. Thursday night was the first debate between the two. And I want to bring in Charles Pierce, lead writer for the politics blog at Esquire magazine, also a veteran observer of Massachusetts politics. He was at the debate between Warren and Brown Thursday night, joining us from Boston this morning. Charlie, it is great to have you on the program.
Good morning, Chris. Good morning, everyone.
So what has shifted in this race? Why we're puzzling through the shift that we've seen nationally in the race in the last month, and I'm curious for the Massachusetts specific answer to that question.
Well, it's funny because I know Kevin wants us to be running a race for governor's council here, but it's a little bit bigger than that. The couple of wild cards in this race that play into what you were speaking about earlier. Number one, both of them agreed there would be no outside money in this race.
Right.
And regardless of what you may think of that, and in terms of entertainment value, I don't think very much of it, but the deal is held. There hasn't been a lot of outside money. So this race has managed to nationalize itself or be nationalized without the benefit of Karl Rove's help or MoveOn's help or anybody's help.
That's interesting.
And I think that's one thing that's happened. The second thing that's happened is that Elizabeth Warren has found her feet as a political candidate a little bit. I think it started at the convention, but I think you saw it a little bit in the debate the other night. My biggest problem with the debate was it was a battle of two people who were completely overprepared. Scott Brown was. Scott Brown was overprepared to be a belligerent jackass, and Elizabeth Warren was overprepared not to rise to the bait. So what you had was a couple of magnets with reverse polarity, and they seemed to be talking. They seemed to be talking past each other a little bit. They didn't really engage. So I think basically you had set up for the next three debates. The other thing that's going on here in terms of nationalizing the race is Scott Brown would rather admit that he's voting for Kodos than admit he's a Republican. You can't find it in his literature. You can't find it on his commercials. He won't say it. He won't say whether or not he endorses the primary candidate.
Well, what do you want him to do, Charlie? He's running in Massachusetts.
No. The way we say it up here is, for Pete's sake, I'm running for office.
Yeah, that's right. For Pete's sake, he's running for office. Charlie,
we elect.
Here, yeah. You wrote this piece about how overprepared they were, and I thought it was spot on because I watched part of the debate, and as a host of a conversation show that sometimes has debates, it was sort of a train wreck because they were overprepared. Like when people come on this show and they have like lots of notes and they're reading off, it's like no, just actually talk to each other. And I was like watching it.
Hang on, Chris, I'm going to hide my legal pad now.
So the one thing that I found useful about the debate though was I had totally forgotten what Elizabeth Warren's job was. Like, what profession is Elizabeth Warren? And I just couldn't remember. And so Scott Brown nicely took a little opportunity to remind me and the voters of Massachusetts.
Yes, if you're
I want to thank Professor Warren for coming out. The fact that Professor Warren claimed Professor Warren's proposals and the criticism that you're hearing from Professor Warren, give it to Professor Warren, she'll spend them. The only person in this race who is hurting the middle class and wants to raise taxes is Professor Warren. The difference between me and Professor Warren, who's always taking as the first approach, give it to Professor Warren to bring to Washington to spend.
So I hope you did not drinking game.
No, I didn't play a game, but I remember then after watching the debate exactly what her occupation was, and I found that useful.
It's funny, as a matter of courtity, I usually refer to people who are university professors as professor this or that.
Yeah, when I interview them or email them.
But, in Warren's case, it's become such a weird little epithet. That like the worst thing you could be is a professor at Harvard. It's such an oddball race,
we have to...
Charlie,
we have to sit through three more of these. I will perfectly stipulate that if he wants to call her Elizabeth and she wants to call him for Scott or Scotty or Liz, I'm willing to go with that.
They should
because
attach,
between senator and professor, I got real tired.
They should attach a rider to the no big money agreement.
That's what I was going to say.
Attach just a little rider that says, let's just call each other by our first names.
All that Elizabeth Warren wants, and I don't think she has any reason not to be referred to as professor, but if she wants to get rid of that, all she has to do is say, Scott, you call me by something other than my regular name one more time, I'm going to start referring to you as Republican Brown.
Well, she could call him Senator Brown.
But she could call him. But why not call him Republican Brown?
Sounds like Encyclopedia Brown.
The other sort of bizarre this sort of in this we don't have the sound of this, but at one point they were talking about the vote for Elena Kagan. Scott Brown voted against Elena Kagan. Elizabeth Warren, in making an argument that look, when you vote for Scott Brown, you're putting a member of the Republican Senate caucus. That's first and foremost what he's going to do, and vote against Elena Kagan. And he says, I'm sorry I didn't vote for your boss, was his response to her, which I thought was pretty hilarious. Kevin, you've been covering this race, and I want to hear your thoughts on it after we take this break.
Sure.
Kevin, you wrote. I really liked the piece that you wrote for the National Review about this race. And one of the things I thought was interesting was just as these sort of two personality studies of two people. In some ways, there's this interesting fact about these two people that they're kind of both American meritocratic success stories. They're people that are manifestly talented and competent and hardworking and have kind of come from different backgrounds that weren't in the inside of the American elite. One's a senator, one's a Harvard law professor, as I went in the debate. What's your sense of the shape of this? I mean, it seems to me the fundamental here is, can Elizabeth Warren hang a Republican around Scott Brown's neck?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a weird race because, having a Republican in Massachusetts, first of all, is just sort of unexpected. And everyone loves Scott Brown on the right because him being in that seat is kind of a thumb in the eye to the Democratic Party. But he's really not very conservative. If you look at what Scott Brown actually thinks and believes, he's kind of a Maine lady, except he's in the wrong state. Whereas then you have Elizabeth Warren, who is running this kind of populist campaign, but she is manifestly uncomfortable around human beings. She is not good in crowds.
I don't think that's true.
I was up there for the St. Patrick's Day thing and watching Elizabeth Warren try to work a crowd.
But those are different things. Let me just say, those are different things. Being uncomfortable around human beings and being comfortable. Being comfortable working a crowd. Charlie, yes.
Yeah, I've been to more than a dozen of those St. Patrick's Day things. St. Patrick wouldn't be comfortable in that crowd. Basically,
Elizabeth Warren looks bereft when she's.
It's a whole bunch of half-drunk. It's a whole bunch of half-drunk has-beens who thought they were. Well, I'm talking about breakfast.
Open bar at 7 a.m.
As the red-haired person on this panel,
we hold it a little bit better up here than they do at the August halls of the National Review.
Charlie,
but I agree. She had to learn how to be a candidate.
Charlie,
and I thought she got.
I think she has gotten better.
I just want to say.
Yeah, go ahead, Charlie.
Yeah, well, she got a big boost yesterday from Tom Menino, who nobody is ever going to confuse with Harvard elitist.
Right. Tom Menino is the mayor of Boston who endorsed her yesterday. Here's the thing I find interesting about Elizabeth Warren. She said she had to learn how to be a candidate.
Yeah.
Elizabeth Warren was this, rock star figure in progressive circles long before she became a politician, and she has, I think, a natural charisma, and that natural charisma.
It's a professorial.
It is, but it's a professorial, but it still has this Oklahoma twang. It's an interesting, complicated instrument she has as a politician, as an actor, as a speaker. And here's what I found so interesting. I watched her speech at the convention, and I thought it was so boilerplate. Like, it was very talking point kind of generic Democrat. And at the same moment that she's finally got shorn away the things that made her, I thought, a very dynamic, vibrant presence that I found to be the source of her charisma, she is doing much better as a candidate. And it is a really interesting lesson.
You're wrong about
less substance, better results.
That's right. Is that, Charlie, is that what has happened?
I think to an extent it is. I think the other thing that's happened is that somebody in Scott Brown's campaign has decided that they are going to throw away the two great advantages he had coming in. Number one, he's the incumbent U.S. Senator, which gives him a certain gravitas. And second of all, he's a nice guy. He's Mr. Happy Barncoat with the truck full of very, lovely children and a great wife who used to be on TV here. And and we do in Massachusetts, as the country is discovering to its horror at this point, elect a certain kind of Republican. Basically because we've got so many Democrats, we don't want them to steal everything. So we elect a Bill Weld, or we elect a Romney 1.0. Or we elect a Scott Brown. We know who these people are. Scott Brown has decided, and I think he probably will dial this back in the second debate, although I don't know, he has decided not to be that guy for the moment. And I think that's thrown him off a little bit.
And can I just, one of the problems that Scott Brown has is that one of his predecessors in the Senate, Edward Brooke, was Attorney General of Massachusetts back in 1964 when Goldwater ran for president. Edward Brooke, as a Republican, was overwhelmingly reelected. Huge margin. But what he did was he renounced Lyndon Johnson. He said, I am not a part of this national party. I am a Republican. I'm going to fight to make the Republican Party something different.
You renounced Barry Goldwater.
Barry Goldwater. Yeah, I'm sorry. I apologize. He did. But the critical thing to understand here is Scott Brown won't do that. If he does not do that, he will lose this race, and he will lose this race because of his association with the National Party.
And the reason he won't do that is because the regional breakdowns in party discipline in the 1960s were very different than the regional breakdowns in party discipline in 2012, which is why the argument... Look, if I met a conservative from Alabama, okay... And
not to engage in geographic stereotyping or anything.
No, I'm saying if I no.
But there are.
I'm saying it's an analogy, the same way a liberal from Massachusetts, right? If I met a conservative from a state that's reliably red and a conservative state, and they had some charismatically local Democratic senator, I would say rationally, if you are a Alabama conservative, don't vote. It doesn't matter how much you like that person; they're going to vote with the Democrats, right? Like it is, you are voting for Mitch McConnell or Harry Reid. You're voting for the National Party, and the Edward Brooke, the geographical. Edward Brooke, first African-American senator.
African-American senator. But I bring that point up because the fact is, yes, we can talk about these things of the regional and different and all this. Bottom line is, it's still a political reality. If Mitt Romney continues over the next few weeks to be as toxic as he is, and Scott Brown does not make that separation, I cannot see how he can win this race.
Mitt Romney, I should say, whether toxic.
There's also a certain precedent here too. In that, a while back we had a really great Senate race up here between John Kerry and Bill Weld. Probably the classic Senate race of the last 10 or 20 years. The thing that tipped it at the very end, besides the fact that Bill Weld sort of decided he didn't want to be a candidate, was that John Kerry managed to hang the National Republican Party around Bill Weld's neck just enough to get a margin of victory.
Yeah.
So now that can repeat itself or it can't. But that's what happened the last time we had one of these. This should be a much better campaign than it's been.
Charlie Pierce, lead writer for the politics blog at Esquire Magazine. Great to have you on the program. Hope we can get you down here in New York one of these days.
Hope so, too. Thank you, Chris.
Christy Vilsack, the Democratic candidate running against Congressman Steve King in Iowa, is going to join us in just a bit. An important correction. Edward Brooks, senator from Massachusetts, African-American Republican, I just said was the first black senator, and I meant since Reconstruction, which is a very important point to make. I didn't know, disrespect to Hiram Rhodes Revels, who was the first black senator in the United States, 1870 to 1871 in Mississippi. Since I just got through reading Eric Foner's 700-page magisterial history of Reconstruction, I would be gravely in error if not to note that.
We need more people called Hiram in politics.
Yes,
it's one of those names that's come by the wayside.
Kevin, don't you think, I almost said, don't you think I'm right about something? Caught myself midway through as a ridiculous post-question. But
and as a rhetorical gambit, probably not going to pay off.
As well.
This sort of, shouldn't a Massachusetts Democrat vote for Elizabeth Warren?
Well, a Massachusetts Democrat? Well,
Yeah.
I would think so. Well, a couple of things. First of all, I think this whole idea of Romney being toxic is way, way overblown. Romney hasn't had the best week ever, but it's still basically a toss-up race, which it shouldn't be for someone in Barack Obama's position. I mean, you know, the amazing thing about Scott Brown is that he's really in the race at all. You know, I mean, this is like a Democrat winning in Utah or something like that. You know, he's in a very, very hostile place. And what's been amazing to me is that Scott Brown, it really has this reputation as being this sort of, you know, nice, likable guy, which personally, even though I sort of like Scott Brown, I don't get, because that doesn't seem like his personality to me. I mean, on the stump, he seems like this, you know, kind of cocky, a little bit of a jerk, actually, which, again, I wish more politicians were like that. Because it seems more honest, but you know, you're talking. What was he saying? Being a belligerent jackass. I mean, you're probably going to see more.
Chris said he was a belligerent.
Was it
Charlie?
It was Charlie. I thought. Yeah. You're probably going to see more of that, and
Yeah.
I'm not sure being a nice guy really wins the race. I think he's likable in that sense, but yeah, and he's in an extraordinarily hostile place. And it's just an amazing thing that he holds office to start with.
Romney being toxic, I agree that it can be overstated. I don't think it's. I actually think the Ryan plan. I think the Medicare Ryan plan is far more toxic as a thing you're going to run ads on than Mitt Romney. But we should say this week a few data points in the Romney causing problems down ballot. First, there's the 47% comment. You have Linda McMahon in Connecticut, which again is a blue state in terms of its national election. She distanced herself from the 47% comment, saying, "I disagree with Governor Romney's insinuation that 47% of Americans believe they are victims who must depend on the government for their care. I note the vast majority of those who rely on government are not in the situation because they want to be."
She's so disappointing.
And Dean Heller, who is Shelley Berkeley's opponent from Nevada, I have a very different view of the world, and as a United States Senator, I think I represent everybody. One of the responsibilities of federal government is a safety net. I believe in a safety net. I think that's one of the responsibilities.
So your data points here is Senate candidates utter banalities.
Yes.
No, actually.
Well, congratulations.
One more data point.
This is always true.
One more data point.
One more data point. Socialistic ideas.
One more data point.
That's
Tommy,
true for
first of
all.
all, let me say this in defense of myself. Even the most basic banalities are not always uttered by Republicans when they come to that kind of distancing particularly from conservative dogma, right? There's all sorts of times in which they could.
In Connecticut?
Well, no, but even in Connecticut, in fact, the Republican Party, to its great credit as a unified entity, often doesn't brook a lot of that kind of dissension. Here's Senate candidate Tommy Thompson explicitly saying, when asked, "Why are you now behind Tammy Baldwin?" saying, "The presidential thing is bound to have an impact on every election. You know, whether you're a Democrat or Republican, if your standard bearer for the presidency is not doing well, it's going to reflect on the down ballot." Now, that's Tommy Thompson.
Yeah. And one thing I think that you're all right about, and especially in the sense of this race being nationalized, is that, aside from everything, is that you're really seeing a kind of decline in real political federalism, where every issue is now a federal issue. The states don't matter in the way that they used to. They're increasingly being treated as just sort of administrative subdivisions of the federal government.
Well, and in our politics, it's particularly true that...
Right. And I think that's enormously destructive for our country. I think the states really do matter, and they ought to be treated as the sort of sovereign entities they are.
On the record, you do want to repeal the 17th Amendment, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So you don't want an elected Senate?
Oh, I want to raise the voting age to about 35.
I love this guy.
Joy.
I just wanted to, in terms of your mentioning that the states don't matter, I think from a policy perspective, and particularly from an issues perspective, and things that are following the laws that are being passed in the states, I think what is proven is that the states do matter.
Sure.
And that's the reason why Republicans are putting more money in the states and in governors' races, in judgeships. That's the reason why.
I mean, there are things at stake there, but if you look at things like, healthcare, we're not getting 50 healthcare systems. We're getting one federal healthcare system. In terms of economic policy. Well, I know you think that. And God will forgive you. But, there's so many things from, healthcare to the economy to other things like, gun rights, which really ought to be a state-by-state issue rather than a federal issue, that all get decided in Washington. You're getting this sort of, Leviathan kind of effect where everything has to happen in Washington.
Speaking of nationalizing election, our next guest is running against a candidate, Representative Steve King, who has quite a national profile. He very much enjoys going on cable news. Not that there's anything wrong with that. To give some very hard right, provocative statements. And we're going to talk to Christy Vilsack, who's running against Steve King in the great state of Iowa, right after this break. I want to give a shout out to Professor Blair Kelly, also known as the best friend of Melissa Harris Perry, for catching the Edward Brooks mistake. Kristi Vilsack is the wife of Tom Vilsack, and she is running in Iowa against incumbent Republican Steve King. Kristi, it's great to have you on the program. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So we're talking about the ways in which you have a very tightly contested race, and all the analysis of what the sort of top swing districts are. It's probably in the top 10, top 15 in the country, and we're talking about the way that the national politics play out locally. And I'd like to get your sense of this. I mean, do you feel that the issues that are happening in your race are about what's happening in your district? Are they about the people's conception of Steve King as a national political conservative figure? How do you see this playing out in your race?
Well, I think we both see this job differently. I see it very locally. We've lost a congressperson in Iowa, and this district is much bigger, and my district is the richest agricultural space in the world. And I'm going to be representing a lot of people who live in small towns and small cities, and they want to make sure that they have economic opportunity at the local level. And so my race is focused on that. Steve King has really, I think, seen the job as through a national lens, through a Washington lens, and I think he sees the job as a way to push his personal agenda and to promote an ideology that has nothing to do really with the economic prosperity of the people in these small towns.
Steve King, I should note the district that you're now running for, that he represents, has been redistricted. It's changed a bit.
Yes.
It is less the voter registration edge, I think, is still Republican in your district, but nowhere near as Republican as it formerly was. Is that right?
Well, actually, I think the independents will decide this race. It's about 37% independent, so neither of us can win the race with our base. So it really, I think, requires an independent spirit and paying attention to all the people in this district. And, my district, as I said, it's probably the richest agricultural district in the country, and it's also a senior district. And so I will never turn my back on the seniors in my district. They helped raise me and make me who I am in the state, and I'm going to make sure I take care of them.
I'm imagining a village of seniors raising Kristi Vilsack.
Right, that's true.
When you say that, I think the obvious subtext there has to do with Medicare, right? And I'm curious how much the House Republican Caucus and the Ryan Plan and the votes on Medicare, how much is that playing a role in your race?
Well, I think it will play a huge role because I don't think seniors want to be out on the streets with vouchers trying to find health care. And I'm going to do everything I can to protect them from that because, they worked really hard and they've worked their whole lives. And these are not entitlement programs. These are programs they've paid into, and now they deserve to reap the benefits of that. And my opponent basically has suggested that the people in my state are slackers and that we're not producing enough and contributing enough to the gross national product, and that we really should be working till we're 74. And there are a lot of people in Iowa who may want to work till they're 74, but there are a lot of people who've worked back-breaking work, and when it's time for them to retire, they should enjoy the benefits of retirement. So I'm going to protect those benefits and do everything that I can because they shouldn't have to use vouchers and come up with another $6,000 to take care of their health care.
Kevin, do you have a question?
Well, I mean, it's not as though our only choices in life are Medicare as it exists in some sort of Dickensian state where seniors are, as she said, thrown out on the streets. I mean, I kind of like her chances in this race because the district is full of farmers and old people, which are the two biggest recipients of welfare pretty much in the country. So if you look at the Farm Bill, I mean, everyone talks about corporate welfare. Have you ever read the Farm Bill? I mean, it is there's a word for it that I can't use on television, mess of, giveaways to business interests. And I think that's probably, worth addressing.
Kristi, I'd like you to respond to that because the Farm Bill is one of the things that didn't get done. And there is a lot of critiques of the way the Farm Bill is put together in terms of who it benefits, whether it actually benefits family farmers or just ends up benefiting Cargill and Monsanto, et cetera.
Well, I think the Senate did a really good job. They're one of the only, this is one of the only successes, I think, this year that they created a farm bill that was acceptable to a lot of people, but the House was not able to pass a farm bill. I'm wearing my Farm Bill Now button. Basically, all of the people in my delegation, including Senator Chuck Grassley and Congressman Tom Latham, basically signed the petition that would have forced the Farm Bill to come to a vote last week. but Steve King did not. He's an outlier in this regard, and I don't know how somebody like him can represent this district, which is all small towns and farm fields and small cities that rely on agriculture, and not show leadership in terms of bringing the Farm Bill to a vote. The Farm Bill, and it's really the Farm, Food, and Jobs Bill, is an opportunity to create jobs. I've talked to a lot of young farmers who are depending on this new Farm Bill to help them get involved in farming. And so, it's really important that we get the Farm Bill taken care of right now.
Democratic candidate for Congress, Kristi Vilsack, should mention the wife of Tom Vilsack. Thanks so much for joining us this morning. Really appreciate it. All right, so what do we know now that we didn't know last week? My answer's after this. In just a moment, what we now know that we didn't know last week, but first, a quick update. This week, Up turned 1 year old. If you've been following along on Twitter today, you may have noticed that Wyeth Ruthven, the very first Upper, is here with us in New York. About a year ago, Wyeth created the Uppers hashtag we've all come to know and love. When Wyeth first started counting the mentions of Uppers on Twitter in October 2011, there were 11. Today, we average between 4,000 and 6,000 Uppers mentions, and the hashtag typically trends nationally during most of the show. For that, we wanted to thank Wyeth, and we want to thank all of you for the incredible community you've built with us. With your help, our second year will be even more ambitious and innovative than the first. In fact, we hope you'll join us on a new digital platform. Today, we're launching a Tumblr, where we'll be posting a lot more of all those great graphs, charts, photos, and videos our team produces every week. You can follow us there at upwithchris.tumblr.com. So, what else do we now know that we didn't know last week? Well, we now know that Chicago public school students are back in the classroom after the Chicago's Teachers Union voted to end their 7-day strike and accept a contract offered by Mayor Rahm Emanuel. We know the strike brought into sharp relief the lines of conflict within the Democratic Party over what is commonly referred to as education reform. We also know that for all the hectoring the Teachers Union was subjected to about hurting their students, the contract they secured after striking includes nearly 600 new art, music, and gym teachers, a guarantee of textbooks on the first day of class, and $1.5 million for special education teachers, among other things. We now know the name of the first village on the planet Earth to be entirely relocated because of climate change. Thanks to a fantastic dispatch from alternate reporter Brooke Meekins, we know the residents of Vunidanaloa on Fiji's second largest island are in the midst of relocating to higher ground because a rising sea and increased flooding have made their previous home uninhabitable. We know that such relocations will become much more common as we enter a new, warmer period in Earth's atmosphere. We know that the CEO of ExxonMobil, Rex Tillerson, who accepts the scientific consensus that carbon emissions are warming the Earth, has this message for the world's farmers.
We have spent our entire existence adapting. Okay, so we will adapt to this. Changes to weather patterns that move crop production areas around, we'll adapt to that. It's an engineering problem, and it has engineering solutions.
I know it will almost certainly never happen, but I'd love to see Rex Tillerson meet face-to-face with the climate refugees that his company's activities are creating, or have Mitt Romney head to the new Vunidanaloa village and tell the people living there how hilarious it is that the oceans are rising. I want to find out what my guests now know they didn't know when the week began. I will begin with you, Mr. John Nichols.
What we know now that we didn't know at the start of the week is that Mitt Romney really is, he's got his strengths and weaknesses, but he's an ignoramus when it comes to the Middle East. A truly disengaged and dysfunctional player. One of the least covered parts of that tape was his statement about Palestinians. Now, when Mitt Romney went to Jerusalem, he passed up opportunities, pleas, from moderate Palestinians, from many people in the Palestinian community to meet with him and talk to him. He also passed up pleas from the Israeli peace community, who wanted to meet with him and talk about the dynamics. And yet in this tape, we know why he passed it up. He passed it up because he wanted to do fundraisers there. Right. But what we learned from this tape is that he really needed to have those meetings. He makes presumptions about masses of people in a deeply troubled part of the world, deeply challenging part of the world, that are so destructive. And I know everybody says everything else about that tape. To my mind, if somebody spent a lot of time in that part of the world, I think that's a disqualifying statement.
We cut that tape and we didn't play it on the show today, but we will put it on our new Tumblr, and I totally agree with you. Joy.
As I said earlier in the show, the country is changing. More people of color will be part of the electorate, and there are organizations like PAC Plus who are organizing for that effort effort and really trying to do that focus on the states in terms of flipping legislators. And so in Texas, Mary Gonzalez, under 30, LGBT, going to represent her constituents there, as well as Mark Vesey. And it's all organized around...
These are state rep
candidates? Yeah, in Texas, no less.
Right.
You know, and, you know, we really need to focus not only on the presidential elections, but also sort of down ballot races and state legislators, because that's where a lot of these policies that we continually fight come from.
Kevin?
Well, at the risk of channeling John Edwards, there really are two Americas in a sense, and there really are two economies. You have a situation in which unemployment remains very high, in which growth is very weak, lots of people in a lot of trouble, and iPhone 5 sales are off the charts.
Yep.
Apple stock hits, what, $700?
Yep.
Something like that? It's a big gap there.
Yes, huge, absolutely two economies right now. I mean, you have all these indicators, the people that in that room with Mitt Romney, and even people below them on the income scale doing very well. People on the bottom third, bottom half of the income distribution are not.
I don't know if this really counts as something I didn't know, because I knew that Barack Obama was not personally involved in the Fast and Furious debacle. I also knew that Eric Holder probably wasn't personally involved, but now there's been the official report to Congress that definitively states that it was about 3 or 4 levels down from Holder that this sort of mess got started. So the conspiracy theory that was endorsed sort of in part by Darrell Issa that it was all a plot to disarm Americans. It's not.
It's not surprisingly less attention covered on that.
So the enormous mess of corruption and ineptitude in the Justice Department just doesn't go quite all the way to the top.
Well, that's better. That's better to have on the bottom. My thanks to John Nichols of The Nation magazine, political strategist L. Joy Williams of This Week in Blackness, Kevin Williamson of The National Review, and Anna Marie Cox of The Guardian newspaper. Thanks for getting up, guys. Thank you for joining us today for Up. Join us tomorrow, Sunday morning at 8. We'll have author Thomas Frank with us and a special round table on the anti-Islam movie and how speech designed to inflame tests our notions of free speech. Coming up next is Melissa Harris Perry. On today's MHP, Melissa takes Mitt Romney's 47% remarks at face value. Country music legend Willie Nelson weighs in, and the reason Paul Romney was booed while addressing the AARP. That's Melissa Harris Perry coming up next. We'll see you right here tomorrow at 8. Thanks for getting up.